Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here to talk about the Champions Classic matchup between Kentucky and Michigan State. Of course, you guys know we're an SEC channel, although we do follow college basketball. And Blake, you especially follow college basketball. And one thing we really follow is Kentucky. And the Cats have the opposition wasn't going to put up a fight, but Kentucky's looked pretty good in 2 games. It's getting shooting from places or from new faces that it lacked a year ago. It's playing without Oscar Tshiebwe, and now really fun game coming up with Michigan State here on Tuesday.
Yeah, and if you're watching this, you're an SEC basketball fan. You're not maybe necessarily a Kentucky or Michigan State fan. As we said, we've teased this. Like, we're going to do some of the bigger games as previews. We're not going to be able to do every game, obviously, just given that it's still football season and all that. But this is a big game, and we want to kind of embrace that in college basketball because we know college basketball this time of year, can play second fiddle to college football with everything going on. So we want to give some attention to some of these big games like this that are significant. And I think this one is just based on, looking at where Kentucky's at this point in the season, even without Oscar Tshiebwe yet, they've looked pretty impressive. We've talked about their depth. That is clearly something that stood out in the first 2 games against Howard and Duquesne. Their 3-point shooting, they have been really good, and specifically 2 guys have helped them carry that. Of course, CJ Frederick, Antonio Reeves, they have combined. Kentucky's hit 11 threes in each of their first 2 games. And so I think that's a big thing because you and I are not surprised that they came out shot well to start. I think a lot of people were, just because you can see the numbers this team can put up. And remember, played the first game without Severe Wheeler. I don't even think Chris Collins hasn't played this year either yet, has he? And he's a breakout type player. So keep that in mind. This Kentucky's without 2 of their better players. Obviously the unanimous National Player of the Year and Oscar Tshiebwe hasn't played yet. I think as of now, which this is going to be the biggest talking point, like we don't know yet if he's going to play. We're recording this on Monday morning. We'll see if we get an update. Of course, the game's on Tuesday night. So you guys will obviously be checking that if you're a Kentucky fan to see if he plays. But still, even without him, Kentucky's looked really good. Michigan State, quite honestly, they had their chances to beat the Zags, and that was a really good game. Great atmosphere. This is a big time early season matchup between these 2 teams.
Well, you mentioned depth. Kentucky really only played about 7 guys last year, which is really kind of odd for the talent Kentucky usually has. Even the end of bench guys are, 4-star recruits usually. But you talked about Kentucky not having a couple of key players so far. When those guys get back, Kentucky could legitimately maybe play 10 guys. Obviously, you're going to see Tshiebwe be a huge factor. They're returning college basketball player of the year, but I think it's the depth that's caught my eye. And the other thing, as I mentioned before, the shooting. We had Jeff Drummond on earlier, a couple of weeks ago. We talked Kentucky football and basketball. He said CJ Frederick was the best shooter on that team last year. Of course, that's the Iowa transfer who was hurt, didn't play a minute last year. I don't think he played a minute. And then you bring in Antonio Reeves, another transfer who averaged 20 a game a year ago, shot it really well. My goodness, those kids keep shooting the ball like that. Reeves was 4-6 from 3, Frederick 4-7 in that win over Duquesne. You add in Tshiebwe, you add in a healthier Wheeler. Wheeler did play last game, but I think missed the one before that in the opener against Howard. You look at Jacob Toppin. He was a lot of people's sleeper pick. He's got a 46-inch vertical leap. And, of course, everybody knows his brother. You got the recruits. You got Onyenso, who has really popped so far. Maybe too early to proclaim the Cats as the number 1 team in America, but that's where Ken Palm's got them right now.
Yeah, again, we always say early in the season, the rankings are rankings. They're not a whole lot for me to kind of figure out what's right and what's not because they play themselves out as the season goes along. But I do think it's important to look at not just, it's not just, well, they've played Howard and Duquesne. It's actually how they played is important here. And if you've not watched them play, then you can't fully grasp how they played and how they've looked because you can look and say, well, they won by 32 and 27. Well, that's great, but it's, they should win those games convincingly, but I think it's how they did it that has really stood out. And you said like the 3-point, Kentucky is in the top 10 in the country right now in 3-point shooting. They're shooting 51.2% from three through 2 games. Now, again, you could say, well, look who they played. No, because guess what, Chris? There are probably times in the past where they played teams in the 350s in KenPom where they may hit 5 threes, and
Yeah.
I think it's that kind of thing. Again, they've hit 11 threes each in their first 2 games. They have 2 guys that can go off and make those kind of 3-pointers. Now, specifically, let's call it what it is. I mean, Reeves has hit, he's gone 10 of 18 thus far from three, which is pretty incredible. That's a great start to the season. So he's done that. You look at CJ Frederick and what he's done. I think he went 4-7 against Duquesne, 2 of 5 against Howard. Like, I'm going to keep pushing this storyline because I think this is what is going to set Kentucky apart from some of those previous teams, is that you do feel like it's not just a Kellen Grady or
Yeah.
somebody, like, you've got 2 guys. And again, there are other guys on the team that can shoot too. But I mean, you're talking 2 guys here that in any game can probably go off and hit at least 5 threes. And I don't know that you've had that consistency in that area the way they have. And I think it's interesting to think, like, last year they were still in the top 100 nationally, around that mark. They shot about 35% from three, which, is not, it's not great, but it's not terrible either. It's about in that, you know, average range. I think it's a solid 3-point shooting. There have been other years where they shot about 34%. Now they're not going to shoot, 51% the rest of the season, but it does feel like, if we're just looking beyond the percentages, which again, I think percentage wise, they've not been as bad as people think in the shooting, but it's just, I think this year they have the ability to shoot more and make more. And, when you're adding it together, if you can make more two or make more threes, that's going to give you an extra point than it is making the twos, right? So I think that's a big element. I'm curious to see how that trend continues. Yes, there will be some games where they don't make as many, but um, I do think that's a very encouraging thing here early on, is to see, I think you've got some guys that will make shots. A couple of the freshmen will be able to hit shots. Severe Wheeler, I think, will knock in some threes every now and then. But having those 2 guys specifically, it just adds another dynamic to this team. And especially, like we said, without an Oscar Tshiebwe in there, and without Collins in there thus far, that's been something they've really leaned on heading into this Michigan State game.
Yeah. I mean, last year, Kentucky just didn't want to seem to shoot it from the outside late. It recruited a guy that thought it would be that in Kellen Grady. The knock on him is he didn't want the ball. I don't think that's an issue with either of those two at this point.
No, they're going to shoot. So they're going to shoot. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it, is having that element you feel a lot more confident in. So I think that's been a big part of the discussion. But like I said, I mean, this is a really good test because, again, we don't know if Tshiebwe is going to play. If he doesn't play, it's going to be a challenge whether he does or doesn't play, because Michigan State's as we saw, is a quality team. It's what you expect from a Tom Izzo team. Like, they're going to be a team that's going to defend. They're going to force you to take some bad shots. And, if you kind of look at that Gonzaga game, Gonzaga didn't have much success from three in that game. I think they turn the ball over quite a bit. So, like, those are things that I think if you're Kentucky, you're looking at here. But I think if you're Kentucky too, you feel pretty confident, I think, for the most part, in terms of your ball handling right now, right? Because you do have Severe Wheeler in there. I think that's the thing. And that's something else I think Kentucky can have an edge in against some teams this season, is you feel pretty confident where your ball handling's at. Now, they've had some turnovers. It's going to happen throughout the course of a game. But I think Wallace will get more accustomed to having the ball in his hands. He had, 4 turnovers, I think, against Duquesne. But I think those guys, the freshmen, will continue to get more acclimated to what they do offensively. And, again, just I think having Wheeler with the ball in his hands, knowing he's going to probably find a way to get the ball where it needs to go, that's another big part that makes you feel a little bit more confident about them on the offensive side of the floor. So I think that's another one, kind of heading into a game against Michigan State, that you just know what to expect. Like I said, from Tom Izzo teams, they're going to be physical. They're going to force some turnovers, I think. And, they're going to present some challenges defensively that Kentucky will try to find a way to take advantage of.
Before we talk about Michigan State, a word to our presenting sponsor, Stakes. That's Stakes. You can predict sports better than the crowd for a chance to win NFTs. With Stakes, players can submit their sports predictions against friends, other fans, and influencers forever. Don't let your sports genius go overlooked. Join Stakes and have the best predictions captured in the moment. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Use our invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. Free to join, free to play. It is a predictions app and not a betting app. Have some fun, help out the folks at Stakes who help us out and make this possible. Okay, we talked about Kentucky, and we mentioned before the season, Kentucky's got a little something you don't expect with Kentucky, and that's veteran experience, more than John Calipari normally has. Well, Tom Izzo, in an era of the transfer portal and all those things that come with it, that starting five of Walker, Hoggard, Hall, Sissoko, and Hauser. I hope I pronounced
Joey Hauser. Yeah,
both those right. But anyway, all five guys returning from Michigan State for a year ago, all those guys, either juniors or seniors, some of them have played bigger roles than others. All of them have played significant roles at some point coming into this year. That's a really good foundation for a team in an age where you don't have a lot of continuity.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we keep saying. It's just the transfer era, and guys come in and guys leave, and that's just how it works. But they do have, the ability to start all upperclassmen. That's a good thing to have in this era, I think, because you can work with that and be able to kind of lean on some of that experience in these kind of games, especially. Obviously, they're going to face a very challenging Big Ten schedule. But look, I mean, you look at Michigan State's schedule overall, right? Like they just played Gonzaga, they play Kentucky now. They're going to play Villanova on Friday. They got Alabama next week. So I mean, they're playing a gauntlet here to start the season. That's a tough 4-game stretch right there. Zags, Kentucky, Villanova, Alabama. So I mean, I think that's something you look at, and and then I think they're actually in the what is it, the Alabama Michigan State game is part of the what is it, Chris? The sorry, everybody's gonna. It's like the boring part of the equation, but it's part of the game in Phil Knight Invitational.
Coming up November the 24th.
Yeah. Phil Knight Invitational. That's what I'm thinking of. So that's part of that too. So there will be another challenging part of the schedule as well. So yeah, I mean Michigan State again. I think it's you watch that Gonzaga game and you certainly saw some of the things that they can do. I mean, Drew Timme was going to be kind of priority number one, I think, for them, and Timme had 22 and 13, I think. But they had good production, kind of good balance. Now the problem in that game was that Hauser that was kind of the big discussion point, was he only had 2 points in 19 minutes. He fouled out. Now again, who's he going up against in there, right? Like who's the competition? And I think that was one of those games that you look at, and again, you're not necessarily expecting him to come out and score 15 a game or anything, because you can go back to last year and see that was not the case. But he is a front court guy at 6'9". I think that was something you watched in that game. But this is a versatile Michigan State team. I think there are some things that too, right? It's like free throw shooting, that they would love to have some of those free throws back in that game. They missed some of those. And yeah, I mean, I fully expect this to be a game that is very competitive. And I think Michigan State, we'll see kind of what the rotation looks like moving forward, but they certainly have, I think, a solid rotation, at least 1 through 7. And but Kentucky, we talked about that depth. I think Kentucky's depth here, and again, that's if Sheepway returns too. I mean, that adds another person in the mix. I'm curious to see what an Onyenso looks like in a game like this, because we talked about kind of the upside that he has. So I'm curious to see how he performs in this game versus Duquesne and Howard, and some of those other guys. For these freshmen, this is that first big game, right, at Kentucky. You're going to get a lot of big games, but this is that first big one. And I think Wallace and Livingston, what we've seen from them thus far, we'll see kind of how they attack this Michigan State team. So,
yeah, Ken Palm has got this one 74-66 in Kentucky's favor. Gives the Cats a 77% chance to win. What's your opinion here?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point it's what we've seen of Kentucky, I think, gives me every reason to believe that they are good enough to win it all. And I think that right now, it's just a matter of when Sheboy returns. What does he look like when he returns? I think those are questions that you have to certainly think about because that's going to determine how far you can go. But we've seen this team through 2 games probably do some different rotations they wouldn't have had to necessarily put out there. And I don't think that's a bad thing because you're getting to see how some of these other guys play together. And thus far, it's been pretty impressive. I think it's all about making some of those threes because Michigan State knows what Reeves and Frederick can do from that regard. But I think this is a game where Severe Wheeler's command of the offense and what they want to accomplish going up against a team that is going to do some things defensively to try to throw you off a bit. I think you can look at that Gonzaga game and see how Michigan State plays, the style that you're going to be presented with here in this matchup, and I just feel like Kentucky's I think Kentucky, like I said, has been so impressive to me thus far, even considering the competition. It's how they played has been more important than
Mhm.
anything. And I think, one element quickly we didn't talk about. We talked about how this team, the great teams Calipari's had, they've been able to block shots, right? And I think that's something too where, look at that Duquesne game. They blocked 11 shots in that one. Ware had some blocks. Onyenso had 3 blocks. Of course, again, you're going to get Sheboy back and those kind of guys. So I think that's an important part too, is that perimeter, or excuse me, that interior defense for Kentucky being able to kind of disrupt shots. That's something else. Didn't have a lot of those against Howard, but if that's a trend that continues, that's another element I think that can really help them in a game like this, especially. So yeah, I mean, I think Kentucky, like you said, they'll be favored. We don't know what the line will be right now, and we're not betting on it professionally by any means, but I just think Kentucky has looked really good thus far, and we'll see what they look like, away from Rupp Arena here.
All right, we will have you covered wall to wall in SEC hoops this year. Of course, we cover football wall to wall. We previewed every single SEC game to this point of the season, had reaction videos, all that kind of stuff. So if you're an SEC fan and like what we do, hit that subscribe button. That helps us out. That helps when we're going to be on. We usually do a lot of times after big games, live streams where we react to games. We do a lot of stuff. We have a Wednesday night show at 8 Central that you can catch and ask us questions. All kinds of stuff here over baseball, basketball, and football in the SEC. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 14 presented by Stakes. And thanks for watching.